Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar on BAME perspectives on aerospace and aviation shaping the future. First of all, we'd like to apologise for the slight delay in starting this webinar due to a couple of technical difficulties. However, the good news is that this has all been resolved and we are now good to go. And we've got all of our lovely panelists here who will be giving you an insightful webinar into the current sort of situation regarding the aerospace and aviation sector, and looking at it from different perspectives based on individuals' backgrounds and also where they see the aviation and aerospace industry moving in the future. This webinar is being hosted by the Royal Aeronautical Society's Diversity and Inclusion Working Group, who have kindly thought to put on this webinar due to partly due to recent events that have obviously changed the current landscape, and we felt that it would be the most appropriate time to bring a group of panelists together to discuss the various options and the various outcomes that the current situation may hold for us in the future. So just before we get started, just a couple of bits of housekeeping for you. So the overview is we were due to start at 3 o'clock, but that's okay. This webinar will consist of a fireside discussion with our group of panelists who you can hopefully all see here today, and this will be covering a range of 4 topics that we will take you through throughout this webinar. We were expecting the Q&A session to begin at approximately 4 p.m. However, this time may be subject to change depending on how we move through the topics and the various themes that are of importance. For the Q&A session, you can add your questions in the questions function on your go-to webinar panel, which you should be able to see, and these will be answered in the Q&A session, which is due to take place towards the end of the webinar. We recognise that there is also a function to raise your hand throughout the webinar, but if we could kindly ask you to refrain from doing this, and instead, if you do have a question for our panelists, please just post it in the questions tab. As always, we will try to answer as many of your questions as possible in the time frame. However, if we are unable to answer your questions, then you can email us at careers@aerosociety.com post after this webinar is completed, and we will try and respond to your questions in due course. If you have a look at the handouts tab on your control panel, there are also useful resources available to you, which includes our careers guides, careers packs, and gives you further information on gaining careers in the aerospace and aviation sector at this point in time. I'm just going to run through the program and the running order with you. So we are currently completing the welcome and introductions, which I will get onto in a moment. Then following this, we will have our fireside discussion with our panelists that will be chaired by Elvis Tinago, who is a member of the Diversity and Inclusion Working Group here at the Royal Aeronautical Society. Following this, there will be the opportunity for you to ask questions, and this can be done via the questions tab in the go-to panel. Please feel free to ask any questions that you have for our panelists, as we would love to hear your thoughts and also your views on the webinar itself. Towards the end of the webinar, after the quick Q&A session, there will be a summary of all the key points and the important topics that were discussed today, and it will also provide you a summary of what you can take away from this webinar going forward. And this will also be conducted by Elvis Tinago. So moving on, I'd like to introduce our panelists for today. So just a quick background to me. My name is Rishi Vadia, and I am the Careers and Outreach Officer here at the Royal Aeronautical Society. So previously, my background has always been in aviation. I gained my airline transport pilot's license back in 2012, so quite a long time ago. And ever since then, I've always wanted to be a pilot, but I've also held many other roles in the aviation sector, including working as a cabin crew for a European airline. I've also worked in ground operations and also worked as a customer service agent at London Heathrow Airport. And I've gained a lot of experience through the aviation sector throughout the last sort of 6 to 7 years. And this has then brought me onto the Royal Aeronautical Society, where I currently serve as a Careers and Outreach Officer, primarily handling the Cool Aeronautics program, which is our primary outreach program, which enables young people to get involved and learn all about aviation, aerospace, and STEM. Other than this, I also handle a lot of the Society's outreach activities, whether it's attending large-scale events and also assisting our young people with gaining careers in the industry. So that's about it for me. I'd like to introduce our chair for this webinar, Elvis Tinago, to give a brief background into himself.
Hello, I am Elvis Tinago, as Rishi said. I'm currently a thermal fluid summer engineering intern in my final year Masters in Engineering Aerospace with some good share at Rolls-Royce as a computational fluid dynamics engineer there. I'm also diversity and inclusion for the Royal Aeronautical Society and Royal Academy of Engineering Scholarship Leadership Program.
Thank you very much, Elvis, and it's great to have you here. And obviously, you'll be chairing the rest of the webinar, and we very much look forward to that. I'd like to introduce Halimatu.
Hi everybody, my name is Halimatu Abubakar. I work for Collins Aerospace. I'm also on the WISE Young Professionals Board as well. I'm here to share some of my experiences as a recent graduate, graduated about 2 years ago, and I've been working in the aerospace industry, in a number of positions and roles. Currently engineering operations manager for a junior factory team, and I'm looking forward to discussing today.
Thank you very much, Halimatu, and I'd like to introduce Shahida Barak.
Hi everyone, I'm Shahida Barak, and I am what you would call a space industry veteran, having been in the industry for 22 years. I'm presently advising a major defence organisation on their strategy for entering the UK space industry. All my formative years were spent at Airbus, where I participated in 8 spacecraft launch campaigns, primarily on the British military satellite program Skynet. Subsequent to that, I worked on Galileo, the world's highest capacity satellites at Viasat, and then I spent some years working on satellite in orbit life extension. But yes, so I'm happy to be here, and I'm really happy. Well, I'm going to enjoy listening to all our views today.
Thank you very much, Shahida. It's great to have you. I'd like to introduce Rachna.
Hi everyone, my name is Rachna Sharma Raiter. I am an airline pilot. I work for EasyJet currently. I've flown several different airplanes, including corporate jets, the 747, and now I fly the A320. I've also a bachelor's in engineering from the Netherlands, because that's where I'm from. Besides that, I have also experience working in safety and compliance and flight operations. Currently I've just recently started with my MBA in aviation management, and in my free time I try to support female pilots or encourage girls in STEM through my blog. I'm also a member of the British Women Pilot Association, BWPA, and the 99s in Germany. That's where I currently live, in Berlin.
Thank you very much for that, Rachna, and I'd like to introduce Sheila Souza.
Hi, my name is Sheila Souza. I work for Arab. I'm a senior telecoms engineer. I work in rail, so a little bit different than aviation, but I think this will be quite allow me to have quite an interesting perspective into the transport sector as a whole, and also learn and understand how the aviation is progressing and potentially give my input. I'm a member of the Association for Black and Minority Ethnic Engineers, AFBE. I've been a member for 5 years now, and I hope to be able to provide a perspective from the association as well in this discussion. I'm looking forward to listening to all the views in the panel, and also for the questions that we'll have at the end.
Thank you very much for that, Sheila. And as you can see, we've got a great set of panelists here who've got so much experience amongst various parts of the industry. So hopefully this should be great in giving you a sort of further background into what they've accomplished in the industry, and how we can sort of move forward from this point. So going forward, we'll move on to theme 1, and I'd like to hand over to Elvis Tinago, who will be chairing the discussion. Thank you very much. Elvis, sorry to interrupt. Would you just be able to unmute yourself?
Yeah, thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah, so our theme one of the webinar today focuses on the future of the aerospace sector and the technological opportunities that provide from now and beyond. So this question to all our panelists on what have you worked on that inspired you, and what are the challenges that you faced in the process? I don't know if Shahida, you want to start on that.
Wow, that's a tough one, directing an aviation question to a space engineer. Okay, so I actually studied aeronautical engineering at university because actually I wanted to be a jet pilot with the Royal Air Force. But unfortunately, you have to have very specific measurements in order to be a jet pilot, and such is life. Aviation is cool. I always say this, it's really cool, it's really sexy, and it's really, the technology is just something phenomenal to, to think about metal flying through the air. I don't have any stories that I can share with this community. For example, I didn't see anything when I was age 6. I didn't see anyone build anything, break anything apart, and I didn't have any inspirational teachers, I'm sorry to say. But what I did have growing up was I had parents who didn't set any ceilings, and so therefore everything was within reach. And I just liked to see aeroplanes. I think they're magnificent. And so I grew up and I fell in love with two things. I fell in love with mountaineering and I fell in love with aviation. And because I couldn't be a jet pilot, I started looking around, when I was at university. And of course, my other passion in life, amongst lots of other things, are the stars. And I was really lucky that Airbus offered me a position whilst I was still after I just graduated. So for me, it's beautiful aviation, and really, it's an answer from the heart as opposed to an academic answer.
Okay, thank you. In light of that, I'm just going to pick up from what Shahida said and ask Rashna question in terms of how what inspired you to become a pilot, and how has the story been so far?
Well, Elvis, I would agree with Shahida. When I look at airplanes, it's the same. When you look at it and you think a metal flying through the air, how does that happen? So how did I become a pilot? Well, I grew up in Holland. At the age of 6, we moved to Holland, and my dad, he flew to India once on a business trip, and he saw a female pilot, and that's how he inspired me to become one. But just like Shahida, I had no role models. I had no one in my family becoming a pilot or even in aviation. I didn't even know if there were any support systems. I don't think so. But yeah, so he inspired me to become one, and slowly I kind of like grew into it. Went to the States, but my parents wanted me to do some type of education before. So what I did was I did a bachelor's in aeronautical engineering. That's what I did. Went to the States, did my licenses, came back, and the rest is history actually. And since then I've flown so many different airplanes, and still to the day of today, I started in 2001 or 2002 actually. Until the day of today, I am so excited when I have to fly.
Yes, thank you. That's really inspiring to hear. I think Sheila and Halimati can pick up on this question in terms of how can young people prepare for the future challenges in engineering and aerospace?
I think I'll take this one. One of the things I'd really sort of encourage a lot of young people is to look for mentors and role models. especially in the industry as well. At the moment, there's a lot of stuff out there in regards to, championing engineering and STEM activities in our local communities and universities and schools. So I'd encourage them to really make sure they're taking part, getting involved. So many organizations across the UK and across the world, really, trying to bring young people into the industry. Role models, for example, some of the role models that I know myself, from the IUT, from IMECI and different organizations as well. Being part of that and looking for that information is always very useful and important. I think, as a recent graduate from myself, I went to Aston University, Birmingham, and there were a lot of groups and different societies that you could actually join, which champion STEM careers and STEM involvement in different activities. And from that, you can actually learn a huge amount, really. Opportunities, meeting industry experts. They teach you a lot about, some of the new technologies, new roles even. I think if you look right now, some of the roles that we even have in the industry were not there a couple of years ago. And things like that, just shows that the industry is ever evolving and changing, and that's encouraging for young people. So my sort of word for them is to make sure that they join organizations and societies that will really give them these visions and people who can be role models for them, really.
Thank you.
Yeah.
In light of the future of aerospace in the industry, what other technologies are you excited about, and what are you really looking forward to?
Personally, I would say automation in the industry. So a lot of people will know that the aviation industry can be quite dated. A lot of the technologies that we use are, dating back to the 70s, 80s, when sort of new development for planes came out and some of the aircraft that we fly nowadays. So I think new technology, automation, AI, smart technology, understanding those systems and, using them to actually advance the aerospace industry and the aviation sector is definitely upcoming. And I think it's here to make a huge difference to a lot of the things we do as well. So that's one of mine.
Thank you. And why is it important for us to continue promoting aerospace and aviation career pathways to the next generation?
Well, I'll say it from my perspective, and this is from somebody somewhat outside the aviation industry, but within the transportation industry. I do think that it's important because people will still want to travel. Tourism is still going to go on. You still want to transport things from A to B. Couriers, defense is still, so it's a industry, a sector that's not going to disappear today or tomorrow. So if we need to have new minds, new brains, people that are young, motivated, excited to come and be part of an industry, we need to have people that are looking at innovation, how to develop the next generation of the industry. We need to look at people that are caring about sustainability. How can we make the aviation industry into a sustainable one? So I think it is so important that we keep on promoting to the new generations to come that this is an industry that you should come and should have a part on and have a say on, because it can be, you can help to continue to revolutionize the world in terms of how it's a form of communication, isn't it? Transportation. So how do we actually communicate with each other? How do we go from A to B? I think it's super important to continue promoting aerospace. And I would say for the young people watching and thinking about it, yeah, it is an industry that is still going, and it'll go strong. Okay, now we hear on the news all the things that are happening with the slowdown and everything, but it's this time there's still plenty of things that will carry on, and I'm sure we all still want to travel. So that is my take.
Thank you very much, Sheila. We'll move on to the next thing.
Just before we continue with the theme 2, we'd like to. We've got a poll for you to fill out. If I could just kindly invite Nick to launch this first poll. This is just to get an idea of the sort of audience that we have with us today. Okay, Nick, and if I could kindly ask you to close this poll. Thank you very much. So 83% of you have answered yes to that, which is, are you currently working or wishing to work in the aerospace and aviation sector? So that's a high number of you who are already either working or are willing to work in the industry. 15% of you have said no, but I thought we'd share these results with you just so we get an idea of what sort of audience we have here today. But moving on to theme 2.
So our theme 2 focuses on the impact of COVID-19 current pandemic that we have all kind of be in the midst of it, and how that has impacted working life balance and coping mechanisms. And our first question, I would like to direct that to Halimatu. And how's the crisis affected you personally in terms of workplace and virtual learning, working and learning, and the positive and the privileges of working from home? And
okay, yeah, thank you very much. I think for me personally, it's been quite insightful and rather eye-opening, to be honest. I work in the manufacturing industry, and so I guess from a company perspective, we once thought we had to all be on site and day-to-day commuting, traveling hundreds of miles for some people to really get to work and start their days. But for me, it's been different because a lot of things have actually still continued on site where I work, and it's carried on almost as normal. As expected, it was a pandemic that affected the whole world, and so it's had its own effects. But in general, it's been quite eye-opening. The release of sort of webinars, Zoom, for example, Zoom technologies, allowing staff and people to be able to still communicate, have meetings, and carry on really almost as normal. But no, it's been an interesting change. I think overall, its impact, we will still see the impact of COVID-19 for at least a few more months or years even, especially on the economy and definitely in the aerospace sector as we restart things all over again. But altogether, it's brought out some new parts that I think a lot of us didn't consider before. So no, it's been very, very insightful for a lot of people.
Yeah. Thank you, Halimatu. And while on that topic, we don't share this privilege with some of the people that work in low-skilled jobs. And I think Shahida, if you want to highlight how that for us, we are able to work and have these platforms to work from home, and other jobs can't do that.
Okay, so firstly, I just want to say that all of us probably know families, friends who have been affected by COVID-19. So really, my thoughts are with all those out there who have been impacted by this pandemic. Secondly, from my perspective, I think industries have been affected differently to varying levels. I know that the aviation industry has been impacted heavily. The space sector hasn't been impacted as adversely as the aviation industry, as the retail industry, for example. So from my perspective, from a space perspective, and I'm not working in manufacturing, I'm working in strategy. So therefore, I have been very fortunate and lucky to be able to work from home, select the hours that I want to work, and it's been fantastic. But I'm really mindful of the fact that the majority of people, I think, have not been afforded the flexibility, the job security, and the privileges that we have been. We are here all today, and we are all talking about the impact of COVID-19 on our lives, on our industry, and so on. But so many people are not in this position that we're in today. And I think because all of us work in a high-skilled sectors, we have all these privileges afforded to us. And so many individuals who do not work in high-skilled sectors have not been afforded these privileges. And I'm just very mindful of that. Space sector, in terms of how it's been affected, so various programs in terms of schedule, in terms of budget, those aspects will have been affected for sure. But in terms of technology, innovation and development, that hasn't been affected so much because, the space sector, we're always innovating. We're always coming up with new tech, and that hasn't slowed down because of this pandemic.
Thank you very much for that. In terms of the manufacturing side, Sheila, do you think that the working environments in there can be transformed by the changes that have taken place currently due to COVID-19?
So I think all of the industries will have to learn from this pandemic. I think is something that wasn't expected, something that you could argue should have been predicted and probably dealt with in different ways in different countries. But I think this has been a big learning opportunity for, I think, everyone to see, okay, the future has to look slightly different. If something like this is to happen again, we need to have a different way of working. We can't have a whole wide industry sectors being affected because people now need to work remotely. And I think with AI innovation, virtual reality, augmented reality, things can start to look slightly different. So I'm not from a manufacturing industry, so this is my idea. So obviously somebody who actually works in manufacturing and knows that what needs to happen when you're in a factory and what can happen when you're outside might have a different perspective. But I'm thinking with the technologies that we now have at hand, with technologies that are being developed, we can potentially create a little bit stronger response in the future. So with AI having potentially machines do some, and when I'm saying machines doing some of the work that maybe allow for people not to be in the factory, I don't mean that machines are going to replace the work of those people. That's not what I mean at all. I just mean that maybe you can control it from a remote position. Maybe you can use augmented reality to do things remotely that you potentially need to be on site for. So I think technology can help us be a little bit more resilient should something like this happen in the future, and potentially reduce the number of people that need to be on site should this happen, and to allow for a bit more social distance type of work environment should we need. Yeah.
Thank you very much. In terms of the collaboration and the creativity that has happened in the virtual environment that COVID-19 has kind of pushed through for us, accelerated, I would say, for a lot of people in the industry. does anybody have good examples of what has happened? I certainly have one that I've seen through happen, the ventilator challenge that was that happened to help us sustain the NHS, and how the industry collaborated to get that rolling out quickly, and to see how, as engineers, you could come up and collaborate and work things in such a fast-paced time. And it was really kind of encouraging and inspiring to see that. I don't know if any of the panelists have any examples within their working environments, Rashna, in terms of yeah, go ahead.
I personally don't know anything yet. You know, what I have seen on the internet, where there was a whole website with a COVID-19 innovation hub, where I saw, you know, different initiatives when it came to, like, for example, education, you know, online education. And yeah, so people are, you know, because of this, people are kind of like more active into thinking how can they do things differently. But I mean, in terms of, you know, when you were talking about, your last question was about working from home. I mean, you know, I'm a pilot. For me, it was completely impossible to work from home. So that's, it has definitely affected me. You know, we can create innovation, but I cannot work from home, even with innovation.
Awesome. Moving on to the next question. Do we think that this will open up opportunities for BAME representation in the sector? Don't know, Halimatu, or want to pick up on that?
I mean, I think it will. Personally, I think the rise of some of the movements that we've all come across the internet, and even things that organizations are starting to look into and do now, you know, to make sure they have the appropriate representations across board, both high level and sort of incoming students or incoming professionals. Really, definitely, I see there are more opportunities that are out there, and I think the industry will welcome that change and will welcome any ideas in terms of, you know, getting more people into the sector. You know, it has been affected, as we all know, by the pandemic. It's been greatly affected, but definitely it probably gives a rise to opportunities that, you know, a lot of people can come into going forward. How do we restructure the aerospace and aviation industry to, you know, potentially combat a likelihood of this happening again? How do we make sure that we put the appropriate things in place and technologies in place so that the impact isn't as severe going forward? But I think in terms of recruitment, there are many graduates. I'm sure this year, there's as I can see from some of my friends still in university, there are so many people who are graduating, so many people seeking roles and opportunities on LinkedIn, for example. And I think, you know, the industry can create that opportunity for people to come in. There's fresh ideas, people with fresh minds ready to come in and do their best, really. So it will be a good one for them.
Awesome. Just bouncing on that, we can move into our theme 3 on what does.
Sorry, can I just add on that? Can I just say something?
Yeah, sure. Go on.
So I'm just going to be contentious, and whilst I agree with Halimatu, I would say I'm not sure how this pandemic and COVID-19 helps communities. I hate the term BAME. I'm just going to put it out there. I find the label BAME offensive. I find all labels offensive. And I just need to say it, so I've said it. But I don't see how this pandemic and specifically actually helps the BAME community in a positive way, because statistics and show us continually that actually communities from minority backgrounds are lagging behind in most polls. whether it's in this industry or whether it's in some other industry. And if anything, this pandemic has actually exposed the social economic differences more between each of these communities. And so therefore, in lots of ways, I would argue, I would put it, to this community, I would say that actually it's probably adversely affected communities from minority groups more.
Yeah. Thanks, Shahida. I think what I was referring to there was how companies can potentially see it as an opportunity to work on these things. Yes, okay. So I think going forward, there is an opportunity there to create those opportunities for the community really, and what they can potentially do. But you definitely have a good point there as well. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you both for that. So we move to theme 3 on what diversity and inclusion will look like in post-COVID world, and what is important to those from PME communities. I'm sorry, Shahid, I have to.
Don't apologize.
Attempt. And I think Halimati have kind of touched on our first question on how that provides an opportunity for industry and employers to create these roles. What does that mean in practice in terms of embedding diversity and inclusion culture in their organization, from not just from a statement by the CEO, but from bottom to top, from HR to the commercial side of things, to where these roles are advertised. I don't know if Sheila you want to pick on that.
To have a go at this one. I think this is a difficult question, and I think it requires as you say, a change from the bottom up, or from the top to the bottom. It needs a full change, and I think to change, I think companies, employers, the industry needs to recognize that potentially there is a problem. I think Shahida referred to it in the fact that the BAME community is typically adversely affected when events like this happen. So there needs to be a recognition that that is the case. There needs to be a recognition that potentially more can be done for diversity and inclusion. And I think he needs a change on the way that the industry recruits. It needs to be a change on the way that the industry promotes. It needs to be a change in the way that the industry showcases what is possible. I think earlier on we talked about role models. The fact that both Shahida and Rachna didn't have role models, I mean, that led them to aviation or aerospace. It was because their parents were quite willing and enabling them to, like, saying the sky's the limit for you. But a lot of people don't have that. And if they don't see themselves reflected in a certain industry, they think, oh, that industry is not for me. So I think there needs to be an effort in showcasing that, yes, this industry is for you. So showing that at every level, so not just at the entry level. So in my case, in an engineering consultancy, not just in the graduate or engineer level, but you need to have that at senior level, at director level. You need to have that in HR as well, because if the people who are going to interview you, you don't see them, you don't see yourself in them, or they don't understand where you're coming from, where your background is, you might have an impediment there. So I think there needs to be a full change in the industry and company culture, the way that we recruit, the way that we promote to students. And obviously this goes even outside the industry, like with STEM, with school, to promote careers within science, engineering, maths, all of that. So I think we have an excellent opportunity to do this, and COVID and the Black Lives Matter movement have highlighted that, and I think we need to recognize that opportunity. I think we need to follow it up, but I do think there will be quite a bit of change required.
Thank you very much, Sheila, on that. Do any of you, the panelists, have or want to contribute to that question?
Yes, I would like to do that. Shahida actually touched upon it just the last question, because we've got the COVID-19 going on, and then we've got another thing going on, which is the Black Lives Matter movement, which is a very important movement. So I think a lot of employers, what they've done is they've put out statements. But personally, I think statements are just not good enough anymore. So I think any employers that is serious about their statement, they would have to critically look at their workforce, see how diverse that is. And if it's not diverse, set serious targets and to say, okay, you know what, we want to have certain percentage of our workforce from diverse background, and just be critical upon them, because, just making a statement, I mean, to me, it means nothing if you don't do anything about it.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I have to say I agree with that. Statement is meaningless without action.
And just a practical example. So I have good friends who work in the HR industry. And one of the things that's talked about a lot, and I'm sure it's being trialed and maybe it's being used already, is to have blind CVs. So to not have names on CVs, because you know what, names are meaningless, right? Because I think I'm older than all of you guys, so I think there've been we all know a story from like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or whatever, when names did affect interview selection, for example. So that's a practical example of how we can incorporate D&I into our HR process, into our selection process. So there are lots of amazing little steps that are being taken throughout industry, the civil service, the armed forces. Everyone is really in this together, and people are working really, really hard to make a lasting positive impact, but it's not enough. We just have to keep going. And if I may just come back to this, the reason why I really dislike the use of BAME is because it's a label. The fact that we still have to use labels in the 21st century is testament to where our society is. Because we shouldn't have to use labels. We shouldn't have to say a female engineer. We shouldn't have to say someone from the BAME community. So we're all in this together. We're all making positive steps. And we are all trying to incorporate D&I, but so much more needs to happen.
Thank you very much, Shahida.
Yeah, and Elvis, if I could just add something to it. Because I think this is very interesting. It's if you look at it's not just about recruiting people from diverse backgrounds. It's also about keeping them. So what can you do internally? Why you have things like employee resource groups. You have you need to create internal support system, because it's no point recruiting them and then having a different workforce where you just don't belong. So that's one thing. And then a typical example that I can think of a program is, if you look at the Amy Johnson's flying program of EasyJet, where they actually had targets to recruit female pilots, of course, because female pilots are a minority. We're only 5% in the world. So they had clear targets and they actually met them, because if you want to measure your success, you need clear targets. And I'm looking forward to programs like these, where employers have, proper programs with proper clear targets, where they can actually look back and say, what have we done in the last couple of years, besides issuing a statement?
Oh, thank you, Rashna. The next question is: have you experienced any racism in your workplace, whether overt or hidden racism, and when is banter not banter? Shahida, if you want to pick up on.
So I haven't experienced any overt racism within my industry. And in terms of sexism, for sure I have. And I'm sure all of us, can say this. And I have too many stories of sexism, which I am not going to, give examples of. When is banter not banter? So the word banter is used too freely to make actually offensive remarks in the workforce, and oftentimes individuals hide behind it's only banter to make sexist, offensive, racist, derogatory comments, and I think we will all do well within our teams, our workforce, and our industry when we hear it, we call it. We have to call out bad behavior. Whenever we hear it, whenever we see it, we have to call it. And again, there's too much banter that's not banter, and we're all intelligent enough to know what is banter and what is not banter. And I've experienced it, and I'm sure all of us have experienced it. So really, all I can say is, yes, I've experienced sexism. Yes, I've experienced offensive comments, and I've tried to call it out, because why wouldn't I?
Thank you. I don't know if any of you panelists want to chip in on that question.
I would say, just to add to what Shahida said, is that if you experience it, call it out. But also, if you see somebody experiencing it, be supportive, call it out yourself. If that person doesn't call out at that moment, be the person that stands up for them and say, okay, this is not okay. This is not acceptable. And that can be done by any of us. We can stand up, whether it's sexism, racism, if it's against the LGBT community, against any disability, call it out, because we won't change behaviors unless we accept that something is wrong. So,
thank you very much.
I think just to quickly add to what's been said as well, personally, one thing I would also encourage organizations and groups and societies to do is also create, the comfortable environment for employees to do this as well. Because as much as we can say people should call this out, most times when it does get to the appropriate places where these issues should be tackled, it ends up having an adverse effect where whoever's called out this problem then gets labeled or stigmatized for doing so. And we welcome, I guess, the discussion we're having today. We're encouraging individuals, if you work in the HR sector, if you work in HR, for your organization, make sure you're creating the environment for people to feel comfortable enough. It can be confidential, it can be, by having a specific person who's responsible for tackling these issues, but just ensure that that space is safe enough for people to do so.
and sorry, I would just add to that as well, saying, and this is why representation is also important, because if you have an HR that doesn't represent, I don't mean in HR you have to have every single type of diversity that there is, but it does need to be representative of your workforce, because if you don't experience it or you don't understand what somebody's going through, it'll be a lot more difficult to actually accept that that's an issue. You should accept it if somebody calls it out anyway, but I just mean if you have a representation across the board, it'll be a lot easier for people to say, okay, I understand where you're coming from.
Thank you.
And Elvis, yeah, just to add, that's what I meant by creating some type of internal support system, where you can address these issues.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And just building up on the points that you have said, what are the current good practices out there that we can build upon? And I think you've already covered the importance of having internal networks for unrepresented groups. But if you have any examples of the current good practices that are out there to support these communities. And I don't know if Shahida, you want to start first on this one.
So I've been really impressed with listening to Halimatu, Sheila, and Rachna. I think, you know, between the three of them, they've really, you know, they've captured absolutely all the points that I would love to make. So really, I just want to digress slightly, and I just want to make the point about, so when we talk about BAME communities, when we talk about DNI, what we are, it's really important to note this, what we are not saying is it's all about us. It's about everyone. It's about Black people, white people, Asian people, Chinese people, disabled people, you know, gay people. Am I allowed to use this term? It's about absolutely everyone, short, tall, everyone. So this discussion for me isn't about what can we do just to help ourselves. It's what can we do to help society as a whole move forward together. And I think, you know, the previous answers actually covered a lot of, you know, the question that you've just asked, Elvis.
Thank you, Shahida. And what can Royal Aeronautical Society and PEI groups do to help, or what are the things that you would expect from the society and professional working group? I don't know if Rachna, since you work closely with pilot groups, and what would you want for those groups and the RIS to do to help?
Well, I mean, you know, I think I would personally think about some type of an internal group. Now, this diversity and inclusion working group, that's a very good first step, you know, because it allows us to contribute and think about solutions, you know, how to diversify people in the society.
Thank you, Rachna.
If I may add to that, I think one of the things that what you're doing today, having a full diverse panel, and may I add, with amazing women as well on the panel from different backgrounds. I think events like this are so important because a university student looks at this event and they can say, oh, okay, I see myself in it. When you have other events or committee and you see that there are people in that that resemble you, is so important. But when I say that, I don't mean that every event has to be with the 4-5 of us. I mean, showing that it's global, encompassing, that everybody is welcome, that it's not an industry for a certain type of people, it's an industry for everybody. And I think that is so important. And then supporting other organizations that do the same. So you name it, just showing that you're there, going to universities that maybe do cater for, that's the wrong word, not cater for, that maybe have a bigger number of diverse students as well would be something that's important. I personally think events like this or societies like yours are on the right path to show to what needs to be done.
Thank you very much, Sheila. I don't know if anyone on the panel wants to add to this.
Personally, I'd probably add in that I think, for example, you know, many organizations out there, especially in the UK, so the likes of AFBE UK, like of WISE, WES, and some of the other diverse groups, I think what some of these they can do is look into webinars, hosted events, and creating awareness. Really, as we know, social media is one of the biggest places to generate awareness, especially in the young generation and even in the older generation nowadays. Just creating that, publicity and awareness across boards to reach different audiences and to make sure that the information we are putting out there is educating people, not necessarily just telling them off as well, because I think I've come across a few things where some people are just, it's more like bashing or telling particular people off, and that's not what this should be about. It should really be about educating them, providing resources that people can access to learn more about, how they can also make a change or contribute to it as well. So I think those are areas that are key to look into.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to add that we should use this technology that's available to us to really dig deep and reach into communities. So really, going to schools, going to primary schools, going to secondary schools, because when you're at university, you know what you're studying, and if you're studying art, you are not then going to one day wake up and say, right, I now want to become a farmer. Maybe you can with an art degree, maybe, I don't know. But so go into schools, and not just inner city schools in the big cities. Go into the Welsh countryside. Who's speaking to these kids in the Welsh countryside? Because those communities are quite impoverished. And so, there's a barrier there for them already. And so let's go absolutely, take our outreach program, Royal Aeronautical Society and any other organization, and go into every community we can think of, and not just the obvious ones like the inner cities.
Thank you very much on that. Then one other question that I have on this is, why is it important to recognize race, and what's the right language to use? I don't know. I'll start with Rashna. Do you want to pick this up first?
Yeah, I mean, race to me, it's part of my individuality. That's who I am. I am an Asian. I'm proud to be an Asian. I acknowledge it. I celebrate it. So if you don't acknowledge race, I mean, you're pretty much ignoring the part of my personality. However, I don't think we need labels, as Shahida said, because what I try to do is I've grown up. I mean, I was born in India. I've grown up in Holland. So what I try to do is balance the both. So I am part of the Dutch community. I speak the language. I celebrate whatever they celebrate. I have Dutch friends. That's where my education is from. That does not mean that I forget my own race, where I come from. It's just this balancing act. But I don't need specifically a label. I don't need to be labeled as an Asian who's working, because I think what it can do is backfire as well. What I don't want to hear later on is, because I've heard someone saying to me, oh, you got recruited because you're a female, as an airline pilot. Yeah, because they have targets, so you got recruited because you're a female. Well, of course that's not correct, because me being a female will not allow me to fly an airplane better, isn't it? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. So I do think race is important to acknowledge. And also, if we're trying to have what you call a productive discussion about race, then you need to acknowledge it first to be able to have a discussion about it.
And if I just add something, I think the points raised were, I completely agree with them. I think a label is not positive. And specifically when this label groups such a wide group of people together as well, it's not a label, because I don't know, I may be a little bit controversial, but this label almost is like, okay, everybody that's non-white will go into the BAME group. And I think that doesn't give any value to the individual people within the group. Yes, as Rachna said, it's important to acknowledge race, but don't put a label in front of our name. Don't don't put everybody, and that just creates a representation, because one person feels like whatever I the whole of this BAME community, and this is a heavy weight to carry, I would say. So yeah, I completely agree with both Shahida and Rachna on terms of not liking the term.
And I think it does completely the opposite of inclusion, putting someone into a box. Yeah. Absolutely the opposite.
Completely agree.
So yeah, I echo everything Rachna and Sheila have just said. So, don't define me by my race. I am a proud Asian Brit, but don't define me by my race, because why should I be defined by my race? I was born and raised in London. I'm under the sound of Bow Bells. So I'm a Cockney, but I'm Bengali. And I'm really proud of both my heritage. And I think moving forward from this webinar and all other webinars, I think we should all make a concerted effort to start using labels less and less. Because the more we continue to use labels, the more there is a division within our society. We want to get rid of division in our society, because we are one race. We're the human race.
Thank you very much. And what advice would you give to a young person considering a career in this industry right now? I think I'll start with Halimatu, since you just graduated recently, and then we'll get other panelists to fill in with further experience.
Yeah, that's fine. I think one of the biggest advice I would give, I guess depending on where you are educationally, if you're a recent graduate, make sure you're reaching out to people if you've got mentors, or if you've got people who are in other organizations as well, to, I guess, probably have a look at, your CVs, cover letters, make sure you're getting help with those things. It can be quite daunting. If you haven't had the resources to understand what a typical CV needs to have or contain. So make sure you're starting from that level, and also be open to reaching out to organizations and networking. So for example, we have LinkedIn, and LinkedIn is just a major platform for businesses and organizations to interact, and people can interact with people from different communities there to, reach out to them, ask questions. If you have an interview coming up, ask questions as well. What am I likely to experience here? Ask friendly questions as well, and just get a feel of what you think that organization is all about, really. One biggest thing I would say is do not be shy. Everyone is human. Even the MD is human, just like yourself. And he was a graduate before, and obviously worked his way, to wherever he is. So just make sure you take everybody, just as normal, and speak to them, ask questions, and be yourself. Be lighthearted. Add a little bit of humor in there as well, if you wish, and hope for the best. But be open-minded, and it definitely will pay off eventually.
Thank you. I'm sure some of the panelists want to add to that.
So I will say so students out there, I always say this when I speak with students: you must have self-belief. You have to have self-belief, because if you don't believe in yourself, then these ideas, dreams, aspirations, they will just be ideas, dreams, and aspirations. If you have an idea in your head, then somewhere in your head you think it's possible for you to achieve that idea. Otherwise, the idea wouldn't be in your head. So you've got to have self-belief. Now, to the experienced people on the other side, we have to make time. We have to make time for students. We have to make time for young people. If someone is reaching out to us, we have to take that call. We have to take it. we have to have that, coffee session, and we have to sit down and have a discussion with people who are reaching out to us for advice. And also, to young people, also, be realistic. We're not good at everything. I know I'm not good at everything. So, you will know things that come naturally to you, and you will know things that don't come naturally to you. So have an honest discussion with yourself about what it is that you want to do, what it is that you feel happy about, comfortable with. I'm really bad at art. I'm not creative. I'd love to be creative, but I'm not. So young people, students, be honest with yourself, be brave, be courageous, have self-belief. And to employers and to experienced people, we have to make time for those who are reaching out to us. Don't be selfish.
Thank you very much, Shahida. I think you have also touched on one of my last questions before I hand over to Rishi on what the senior leadership or the people that have experience when they get students reach out to them. And I want to just bounce on from what Halimati said about mentors. I think it's really important. I've found it really useful to have one, somebody that I really seen the potential, some of the things that I didn't see myself, and kind of reflect and push this, since I come from a family that is not engineering, they're all medical field or some form. And this was just inspiration from what I love doing and that what came natural to me. On that note, I will hand over to Rishi. We are support for us and some Q&A.
Elvis, could I add something to it?
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
Right.
So, we're going through a very difficult time, the aviation industry, and me being a pilot, I just want to give out a message to, if there are any pilots who are attending the webinar, some of the young guys who have probably just recently started their career, I would suggest, if you're still flying, you still have a job, you're flying, I would suggest, please, if you can get yourself involved in other duties than besides flying. Airplanes are just not about flying. There's more to do. There's more going on in the background. You got ground operations, you got compliance, you got safety. So if you can get yourself involved in more, then what you'll have is you'll actually learn something new, gain some more skills, because the industry, it's a very volatile industry. It goes through its ups and downs. So when something like this happens, and we know that a lot of pilots are being made redundant, so at least you'll have a plan B, and you can do something else in between.
Sure. Thank you so very much, Rashna, and thank you, Elvis, for chairing this session of the webinar. It was such a fantastic conversation. It was so great to hear all of your ideas and sort of your aspirations for the future, where you feel the industry is going and how the industry can adapt to the changing times that we are living through right now. So it's been great to hear all your have all your feedback and hear your views and opinions. Just before we move on to the Q&A, we've just got one last quick poll for our audience to fill out. So if I could just invite Nick to quickly launch this poll. And this may be seen as quite a difficult question, but it is quite an important question, which is: have you experienced racism in the workplace or at any other professional or in any other professional settings? If I could just give you a few seconds just to answer this quickly. Okay, and if I could ask you to close this poll, please, Nick. Thank you. So 60% of you have said no. So you've said that you haven't experienced any form of racism in the workplace. But 40% of you have said yes, and 40%, is still, whilst it's it's less than half of you, it's still quite a high number. So there is sort of there is definitely a cause for sort of discussion going forward, because of 40%, like I said, is still relatively relatively quite high. I just wanted to quickly get a quick sort of opinion of those results from all of you, if you'd like to comment.
I think 40% is really high. Why do we have 40? Why do we have 40% experience of racism in the 21st century? I think it's absolutely shocking.
I agree. 40% is very high.
Yeah, that just shows that there's a lot of work that needs to be done, isn't it?
Absolutely, and I think that's why it's important that we do ask the hard questions. As hard as they are, these are the questions that need to be asked, because it's only by knowing the answers to these hard questions that we can make changes and make improvements to move forward in the future. But thank you so very much for that. We'd now like to move on to the question and answer session. We've had lots and lots of questions from you all, and they're really, really interesting. So I'll begin with the first question, which is that there have been sort of many initiatives that have tried to sort of increase diversity in the aerospace, and they concentrate on role models. But as several of you have mentioned, they were a lot of you were inspired by the industry and innovation rather than by individuals. So do you think that there are other ways that the industry can reach out to people from underrepresented sectors other than just using role models? Are there any other ways that the industry can reach out to underprivileged, underrepresented backgrounds?
I think, yeah, sorry. I'll be quick. I think one of the ways that was mentioned, I think it was Shahid that mentioned going to schools, promote them, going from a very early age, primary school even, showing this is what you can do. So role models are important, but it's not the only way that we can do it. STEM activities, programs like being an ambassador to a specific area of schools. Like I think Shaida mentioned, going to underprivileged locations, don't focus only on city or inner city locations, go to areas that maybe not many people go. So I think that is one way that can be used to reach.
Sure, thank you, Sheila. And any, if any of you'd like to add to that at all, please feel free.
Yeah, I think engaging with the groups, local groups, that's a very good thing to do. And now with the internet, that's very easy to do. There's so many groups that represent under, all these, the BAME community. Sorry, Shayda. So I mean, it should be very easy to do. Of course, role models are just not enough, but yeah, going to schools, but you have to engage with the local groups. You can't just sit back and comment on, oh, we just don't have enough solicitants. I just don't think that's good enough nowadays.
Yeah, and so I just want to say something quickly. So in addition to having extensive outreach programs that Sheila and Rachna, I've talked about just now, there are lots of other ways as well. So over the last years, I've been getting more and more involved with, with discussions with our armed forces and, young people from the armed forces getting into STEM, for example. And you know what, you will be absolutely really shocked to see the kind of programs the cadet forces, have in place. And so the cadets, whether it's the RAF cadets, Army, they really put on amazing, diverse, extensive. They have programs in place that really exposes the cadets to a whole bunch of future careers. And it could be in STEM, it could be in another subject area. So there are so many ways in this day and age where young people can get involved, but they need to know about these things. If they don't know about these programs, then it's all very good having all these programs, but then they don't know about it. So it's about getting the message out that there are so many ways to get involved, to gain knowledge about about the different sectors that are available to young people.
Sure, thank you very much, Shahida, for that.
Oh, just really quickly, I was going to say, what I think, if there are any organizations or even the government, anyone from the government in looking into this webinar at the moment, we need sponsors. I think industries and organizations need sponsors and support. For example, Shahida mentioned the cadets and I guess the army as well. They get a lot of support from the government. A lot of things are publicized on daytime TV, on kids TV, teen TV, for young people to see the opportunities there. And what would be good is if we had, a version created for STEM, for STEAM, even also for diversity, encouraging young people and being right, I guess, somewhat right in their face, really, because I guess a lot of young people watch TV, they're on Instagram having ads and things where they can also engage and just see, oh, okay, that's an advert. We want to find out more, and how do we get involved with this? Just having those sponsors and people who can invest into it as well is also it's really, really key.
Well, thank you so very much for that. And we had some great opinions and answers there. Moving on to another question is, do any of you have examples of what you may have found the most supportive in the workplace in terms of development opportunities or to make the workplace feel safer and more secure? Not sure, Shahida, do you want to pick? Oh, Halimah, go ahead. Yeah.
I'll quickly say something on this. I think having good management who are trained to understand a lot of these things is very important. I think organizations need to have the right training and development schemes, empowering managers to be able to really sort of understand where people are coming from, especially. I'm blessed to have an amazing manager myself where I work, and almost it's quite good because I can always go up to him and if I need to go and have any training or anything that I feel is very going to be useful for me long term in terms of my career, I can always speak to him about it and get a really good answer there as well. So just organization empowering managers to understand what colleagues need and really empower the people within the organization as well. It's very important.
Sure, thank you. So, yeah, go ahead, Shahida.
Personal examples, the teamwork and the team that you find yourself in when you first start working. I was it's not all about luck. I think that's important to say. And so I was really fortunate to find myself in a team where they were all so many more years experience than me. I was just a graduate, and they empowered me. So, leadership, the structure of leadership, communication, effective communication, all of these elements need to be in place for individuals to really thrive in the workforce. And so I had leaders who empowered me from when I was 22. I was making decisions from when I was 23. And then when I started working, with members of the armed forces on the military satellite program, I found it really, really, to me, it was second nature to have conversations, with a whole different group of people and make decisions, and because I was empowered and I relished it. So communication, team structure, leadership. Yeah, so many things.
Sure, thank you very much for that, Shahida. Moving on to a next question, which states that the question states that there are organisations that are talking about diversity, so the conversation is happening amongst our sector and across the board, really. But there is a concern that there is no sort of firm action or results from these conversations. So the question is, what practical action on the part of organisations would you like to see, in terms of what practical actions would you like organisations to take to sort of improve diversity and inclusion within the organisations and within the industries as a whole?
Maybe I can start on that one. I do think Rachna earlier mentioned one of the very important things to have is to understand where you are at the moment. understand what do you have in your company in terms of diversity and everything, and then maybe set up some targets, like saying, okay, using from Rachna's example, we don't have many female pilots. The target is to have, say, 10% pilots. And with that, I'm not saying that you just go on hiring random people, but you hire the best person for the job, for the role, but ensuring that you've reached that target. So at least it is a starting point. And I think ensuring that you are accountable to that, ensuring that whatever you set up as a target, you actually are following through with ways to reaching it. Yeah.
Sure.
I think, a while ago, we as AFB, we issued a statement, actually an action plan on how companies can go about it. And there's a few steps that we believe are important. And I think it is on the handouts, and that can be followed as well. And one of the things that we say, it is be accountable for what you say you're going to try and achieve.
Sure, thank you, Sheila. Would any others like to add to this at all?
You know, it would be great if the companies could publish those results. You know, just like what we had with the gender pay. I think where the companies were publishing the results, and you know, I hope in a few years the companies would actually publish their results. You know, what they have been doing for the last few years. Was it just a statement, or did they actually do something?
Sure. And Shahida or Halimatu, any?
I've mentioned it before. I think CVs shouldn't have names on them.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely a fair point. Thank you so very much for that. One of our final questions is that obviously the world is made up of different, you know, a wide range of people with different personalities and different approaches to the way of doing things. And this can often be a question that is not asked very often, but the question states, how would you deal with people that become overly sensitive when you have to call out bad behavior in the workplace? Because like I said, the world is made up of different personalities and people react to things and people react to comments in different ways. So just like to get your opinions on that.
I would say that I'm going to go from the perspective of the person who becomes overly sensitive. I would say people need to realize that every experience is different. You shouldn't feel offended because somebody has told you that something that you did is wrong. So I think the onus shouldn't be on the person necessarily that calls out the behavior. I think the onus should be on the person that has the behavior. So if you've done something wrong, I think it's very important for you to take a step back and accept, okay, this is something that I shouldn't do. Don't be offended. Oh my God, I didn't do that. That didn't mean that. Okay, I understand where you're coming from. I understand that offended you, and I'm going to learn, and I'm not going to do it again. So I think the onus should be on the reverse, in my opinion.
And I would say it should be evidence-based as much as possible, because as soon as we make a statement and we call out bad behavior and we back it up with evidence, then actually that's a really strong position for both individuals. For the individual that's behaving badly because they are presented with an example where they have behaved badly, and so they acknowledge it. And it's strong for the individual who's calling out the bad behavior because they've provided evidence. And you know something, whether it's in the workforce or whether it's in our personal lives, anywhere, you know, we are human beings, we have emotions. And oftentimes, you know, our emotions can drive, you know, how we behave at work, how we behave at home, and so on. And I think that's really normal because we're humans. But always, if you can, back up statements with evidence.
Sure, thank you so very much, Shahida. And moving on to our final question of this webinar, which sort of is surrounding the concerns around the current sort of market in terms of jobs due to the COVID crisis. And the question is talking about the people feel that there's already been a limited amount of jobs available in our sector. And obviously the redundancies being made due to the COVID crisis have caused a lot of concern for the wider sort of aerospace-based community. So the question is, how can we sort of look after our industry from losing too many staff? Because the issue is that there's a lot of concern about when people will be able to get these jobs again. I mean, we hear a lot of news about companies sort of making people redundant. And the issue is how can sort of the industry ensure that we help people to sort of get back on their feet and sort of get and become employable again. Do any of you have any responses to that at all?
So I don't work in the aviation industry, so from an outsider looking into this industry, I will just make a general comment. Firstly, we have to acknowledge that the economic climate has fundamentally changed, and because of that, there will be job losses, and that is unavoidable, and it's heartbreaking, and it's unfortunate. So for those of us who have lost our jobs, who are about to lose our jobs, I would say, you know, to the employers, there should be some system in place where counselling, coaching, and retraining is offered on a limited time basis, because no company is awash with money, and so there's a reason why people are losing their jobs. Secondly, you know, all industries, and I'm sure they're doing this already, should be looking at their business models. Why did we have the number of people that we had? Do we need, how many people do we need moving forward to support the various programs and structures and strategies that we have in place? You know something, there is no nice answer or remark to this question, because the world has changed. And it's like when we discovered oil in the UK, you know, our miners, you know, were they lost their jobs. They weren't offered retraining. And they fell back on, you know, many communities fell back on the welfare state. And you know something, we should have offered them retraining. So I would think about retraining and a counselling, coaching package.
I'll touch on what you just said, Shahida, and say that as an individual, you should always think about upskilling as well. Like, specifically, events like this show you that knowing one particular thing doesn't make you, how do you say, resilient to everything. So every chance that you get, upskill. Like we talked about innovation, new technologies, AI. I think all these themes, like, learn. I think Rachna mentioned earlier, if you're a pilot, for example, don't only focus on flying, learn other skills that if something happens to the industry, you can quickly move around and say, okay, I'm fit for this as well. So yeah, retraining, upskilling yourself.
Thank you very much for that, Sheila. And unless any of you have got anything else to add, that would bring the Q&A session of this webinar to an end. So I'd like to thank you all so very much to the audience for submitting some fantastic questions that I hope we've managed to answer for you. I'd like to very much thank the panelists for taking part in this Q&A session. I'd now like to hand over to Elvis, who's just going to quickly summarize the main key points that were raised throughout this webinar.
Thank you, Rishi. I think there's been very interesting points from the panelists today, and a lot of points to take. But the few that have stuck out to me is the continuous need for transportation and demand that is going to be there and for time and beyond, even now and continuing further into the future. So yes, the aviation industry has been hit hard by the COVID-19, but there is hope because there's always need for transportation, and jobs will be available in whatever form or way that will look like in the future, and how COVID-19 has allowed flexibility for people working from home to manage that, has allowed collaborations that we have never thought were possible before, where you have students from all over the world collaborate on methods, or startup companies erupting from solutions to deal with this pandemic, or prepare on how, if another pandemic do come about, how do we solve that? And one of the interesting points was that the statement without the works itself is not valid, that employers need to really to implement their statements through their recruitment, through their promotions, through allowing the minority group, people from the minority groups, even any other people, to provide a culture of diversity and inclusion, of thought, of culture, of language, and mentorship programs for younger people are very important. That both the mentees and the mentors that do reach out to the people through LinkedIn, through networking groups, through the Real Renesco Careers team, and support, let them review your CVs, and embedding culture into all the organizations as the backbone of how we work for the future. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Elvis. And I'll just pick up on a couple of points there that have been made throughout, some of the key sort of quotes that have been said throughout this webinar, which I'm sure we'd all like to hear again. So as Shahida said, it's about absolutely everyone from all different walks of life. We are in this all together. It doesn't matter what background you're from, doesn't matter what ethnicity you're from, it doesn't matter what your orientation is. We are all in this together, and it's an uphill climb to sort of achieve diversity and inclusion across the board across all industries and across the world. And it's also, words are not enough, actions are needed. And that, I think Elvis and Sheila touched on this about the statements, especially with relation to the statements coming from various companies. It's all well and good to make a statement, but it needs to be followed up with a clear sort of plan of action of how the industries and organizations are going to move forward with implementing a sense of diversity and inclusion within the organizations that will work for everybody and not just a select few people. And as Shahida said, we need to get rid of division in our society. It has been obviously plaguing communities, and it's been plaguing the entire world for generations. And it's something that sometimes throughout the years people want to believe has gone away, but there'll always be events that will sort of bring this back and sort of remind us that it's still very much there. Maybe not at the forefront all the time, but it's still very much there. And these are issues that need to be highlighted constantly, and it's about sort of constantly improving ourselves and improving the people around us to ensure that we do sort of get to a level playing field where we're all equal and we all sort of walk the same path, no matter where we are, no matter where we have come from. And also, whilst the current crisis has obviously had a downturn on the industry, it's very important to have self-belief, because I think self-belief is one of the first things that will get you to where you need to be. No matter what situation you're facing, no matter what the current climate is, no matter what the external environments are around you, having confidence and having self-belief will always pay off in the end. And this, along with hard work, will always get you to where you need to be. So I hope this webinar has been helpful for you. We've discussed some really interesting and exciting topics and had some really interesting conversations about some difficult challenges, and it's important that we have done this. However, this is just the beginning, and there will be follow-up conversations to this, so do keep a lookout. Just before we close, I'd like to just quickly hand over to Sheila just to quickly give a brief sort of introduction to the AFBE and what sort of events and sort of outreach work that they do to inspire the sorry, Shahida, the BAME community.
Thank you so much, Richie. So as I think I mentioned, I'm part of AFB. We're an organization that tries to promote engineering and science subjects to the Black and minority ethnic community. We have a range of events and a range of activities that go all the way from STEM activities, going to schools, promoting STEM subjects, to universities. I think Ali Matthew mentioned before events such as helping people build their CVs, helping people with interview techniques, assessment centers. So one of our major events is actually regarding that. And then we also have, more recently, because of COVID-19, we have had quite a few webinars on different topics. So one of my 5G, the connection to, which I have none. See, there's been a lot of talk about that. So we had a webinar on that. And we have a few events coming up. One of them, which I believe is today at 6 p.m., at 5 p.m., is the STEM Ambassador Program. This is to give people the opportunity to find a little bit more about our STEM Ambassador Program, how you could join, and also provide you an opportunity to learn how you can join and support AFB as well. We have our Real Project event coming up on the 22nd of July, which is on the role of clinical and biomedical engineers during the COVID-19 crisis. You can find the links on the screen. And we have an awards dinner. This is the exciting one in November, where we'll be promoting, of course, engineering in the community, but also giving awards to people for the young engineer of the year, the young BME leader of the year, outstanding mentor, and also the company of the year. So if you know anybody that you think you could nominate, please do. If you want to self-nominate, that's also fine. And just one final thing that I'd like to mention, I kind of highlighted to it earlier on, is our Access A action plan. It's on the handout section, and this is something that we created during the height of all the companies doing the statements, and to show, okay, we've all made statements, what can we do now? And so for companies, I think it's very important to have steps that they're going to take, as mentioned before, and AFB is there to support if companies need any sort of guidance or support on how to implement diversity and inclusion and how to navigate this. So thank you so much. I absolutely love being on this webinar. And even though I'm not in the aviation or aerospace industry, it was very interesting to hear all the different opinions, views, and understand a little bit more about it.
Sure, thank you so very much for that, Sheila. The AFB is a fantastic organisation, and we've been very fortunate to have you with us here today. So thank you so much for your contribution and for spreading the message of the AFBE and the positive impact that it has on communities all over the UK. So thank you very much. So just to close up, this webinar has been recorded, so you will be able to see it on our YouTube page within about 48 hours or so. If we were unable to answer any questions, please do feel free to email them to us at careers@aerosociety.com, and we will ensure that these are answered for you within due course. You will also receive a short survey after this webinar, which will give you the opportunity to provide any feedback that you may have on what you thought, on how you thought the webinar was, and make any recommendations that you may have for future webinars surrounding these topics. If there's any particular topics within this webinar that you'd want us to elaborate on in future webinars, then by all means do let us know. We've also got a range of resources on our careers website, so that's careersinAerospace.com for further news and events, and you can also access a lot of resources into to help you prepare for employment, such as CV guidance, interview tips, and also receive a lot of updates on the aerospace industry. If you want to find out more about the diversity and inclusion work that the Royal Aeronautical Society have been doing, this is also available through our website on the aerosociety.com, and then you can just go into the governance section, and then there's a diversity and inclusion section there, which provides you more information on our strategy going forward with the diversity and inclusion working group for the society. There's also various channels that you can engage with the society, whether it's through Twitter, through Facebook, through YouTube, with where a lot of our various previous webinars are. We're also on Instagram, so do feel free to try and follow us on there. And like I said, once again, if you do have any other queries, just contact us at careers@aerosociety.com. But for now, we'd like to thank you so very much for joining us. It's been a fascinating conversation surrounding the ways in which we've all been impacted by the COVID-19 situation. And we've also tried to highlight positivity and how we can sort of move forward in a positive way to ensure that all sort of communities are represented within our industry and externally within the world, in order to ensure that we are safeguarding our future generations for our industry and also elsewhere. So I'd like to thank all the panelists for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to have you on behalf of the Royal Aeronautical Society and the Diversity and Inclusion Working Group, and we very much hope to welcome you all back soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much.
Thanks everyone from the society. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.